Tom. Okay, so we've heard about partners this afternoon a number of times, and interestingly, and obviously wasn't an exhaustive list of all the people who contribute to biodiversity conservation in our country, but I didn't hear once as yet the contribution of local government. So I'm just trying to, this afternoon, give you a sense of what's happening in the eThekwini municipality, and I think we're doing a reasonable job of adding to that overall national effort for biodiversity conservation. So we'll just start with a problem statement. In the first instance, we have question marks around our role in terms of legal mandates. So as most of us will probably know, is that nature conservation and environment are in fact functional areas of concurrent national and provincial legislative competence. So the key word there being legislative competence or term. On the other hand, local government obviously has responsibilities in terms of various bits of legislation, particularly the Constitution and NEMA, to be involved in protecting the environment within its jurisdiction. So in Durban, obviously, we won't dwell on statistics much, but we have significant levels of poverty. We have significant service delivery backlogs. So just by way of example, our housing or human settlements unit estimates they have a shortfall of 404,000 housing units in the municipal area. And those of you who know Durban and the topography, you'll understand that opportunities for finding space for those houses are extremely limited. So there's significant challenges there. At the same time, we recognize as a local government that we in fact are part of the Maputoland, Pondoland, Albany region. In other words, one of the 35 global biodiversity hotspots. So we sit here in a very special part of the world in relation to the world's biodiversity. I think it's fair to say, a couple of things I might say this afternoon are mildly controversial, but I think it's fair to say in Durban that in terms of the mainstream, biodiversity conservation or environment is generally seen as an impediment to development. So that be it whether you're a landowner, a developer, an official from another line function, or a politician. In many instances, we continually seen as the impediment to development and are vilified as such to some degree. The other thing is that, obviously we've got a big country, we've got limited resources, but the reality is the other spheres of government are not particularly active in Durban. So we do have some KZN wildlife nature reserves, we have obviously district conservation officers, but in real terms, the action on the ground is obviously quite limited. So local government has a role to step in to assist. So the problem statement, my question is, what contribution can local government actually make to biodiversity conservation efforts? And I'm hoping I'll show that in this short presentation that in fact they can be quite considerable. Right. In the first instance, what we've done in Durban is we have an interest, of course, across all environments, but we have a number of vegetation types which are particularly threatened, and we decided to, amongst other things, develop a focus on KwaZulu-Natal sandstone salveld as a vegetation type within the municipal area, an endemic vegetation type to the province, which has faced high levels of threat. So this is a vegetation type which has very high levels of transformation, ongoing degradation. Yet there's still opportunities within Durban because of the original location or the location of the vegetation type, generally in the peripheral parts of the city, for conservation action. So the target for the vegetation type nationally and provincially is 25% of its original extent. Statistics that are available show that in 2006 in Messina and Rutherford, the transformation rate was already approaching 70% for the vegetation type, so we have 30% left. But I think a lot better figures produced by KZN Wildlife in a report that I believe Debbie Jewett did, 2011, showed that in fact the real number in the province is probably more likely 90%. And then our own local government statistics show, based on 2013 aerial photography, suggest that the number is around 85%. So 85% transformed, and by that we mean completely lost to some form of hard development. That number also doesn't reveal another statistic. In the remaining 15% that we have, 2/3 of that grassland that remains is in fact degraded in one way or another. And that the implications of that, the importance of that is that, to our knowledge and in our experience, the restoration of our coastal grasslands is probably impossible. So we obviously need to, in the first instance, to protect what little remains, and then try and address the remainder with restoration, but in reality that's probably not going to happen. So the vegetation type is listed as endangered in terms of the threatened ecosystems listing, but in reality it probably should be listed as critically endangered based on local and provincial statistics. And that is because the amount of remaining habitat is less than the conservation target. And then perhaps the most damning of all statistics is that in terms of what's conserved in a statutory conservation area, we have 194 hectares, and that's all. And that's in the Vernocrooks Nature Reserve, which is outside the municipal boundary, and in the Crosscliffe Nature Reserve, which is inside the boundary. But obviously a very, very small percentage, 0.1% in conservation. So in terms of responses, we've heard about, I think Guy was talking about developing strategies. To be honest with ourselves, a lot of what we've done in the city has been based on just opportunistic action, but certainly we're conscious of the fact that we need to move towards developing proper comprehensive strategies around all our ecosystems, but this one in particular. Over the years, we've had to undertake a number of conceptual and methodological shifts, and the reasons being are manifold. Obviously, we're trying to bring home the importance of the ecosystem, and to be honest, we probably had a limited success in the broader mainstream Durban, and trying to underpin our decision making with good science as far as possible. So we now undertake our natural resource management planning in Durban through systematic biodiversity assessments. We rely heavily on the value of the ecosystems in terms of ecosystem services that deliver to our residents. And we've obviously piggybacked in our department. We have a strong climate change adaptation function. We've piggybacked on those folk because they tend to have a lot more airplay in Durban. And the latest kid on the block in Durban is looking at urban resilience because we've joined a program, 100 Resilient Cities program. So again, trying to pair up biodiversity conservation with these more popular concepts and ideas which are being developed within the municipal area. And then lastly, a bit like the Working for Water and other Working for programs, we have our own downscaled Working for programs within the municipal area. And again, for the same reasons Guys explained, for obviously the conservation that happens on the ground, but also poverty alleviation, etc. A particular challenge for us is that we don't have control over the KwaZulu-Natal sandstone sample that we have in the municipal boundaries. 64% of it is in private ownership or in communal ownership, and that in itself is a particular challenge for us. One of the things I think our strengths in the city is that we have a particular emphasis on implementation. So whilst we understand that planning is critical and doing it with proper information, we're not sitting around waiting for the planning to be finished. We're getting on and doing the job while we can. So in terms quickly on our biodiversity assessment and planning, so as I mentioned, we have a systematic conservation assessment which is almost complete along with the biodiversity sector plan. And the idea being that the products will ultimately be included in the provincial conservation plans through a memorandum of understanding we have with Ezemvelo. And in particular, we're grateful for assistance which we've received from the conservation planning section of the province in terms of assisting us with methods and information, etc., in order to make our plan more robust. I think key points around our plan is that it's done in-house, so we're building internal skills. It's done at a very fine scale, so our vegetation mapping is at 1 in 5,000, so we have a really good handle about what's there on the ground. We're able to use new recent photography, so we have 2013 photography, an excellent land cover layer map from the 2013 photography. We have, we think, a much better understanding nowadays of the historical vegetation distribution in the city, in particular the ratios between woody vegetation types and grassland vegetation types, because it's quite important to get those concepts right because they have big knock-on effects in terms of transformation statistics or target setting. And the same would apply to wetland distributions. And then we have much improved biodiversity feature data specific to the city, which we are able to access from various experts. We're getting better at making sure our spatial prioritization informs our implementation, and we're not 100% there, but most of our projects now happen in our critical biodiversity areas. And overall, at the moment, in terms of the conservation asset or the environmental asset of the city, we're managing and protecting around 12%. So there's a hang of a long way to go in terms of getting the entire area under some form of protection and management. Okay. Obviously, we're not able to do that in terms of simply buying and managing each and every site, so we have to look at innovative ways to achieve the conservation outcomes. So one of the key strategic opportunities we have as a department is we're located within a town planning unit, the broader town planning unit, and that has given us the ability to have our conservation layer integrated in our full hierarchy of framework plans in the city. So from our spatial development framework all the way down to our local area plans, you will find our conservation layer sitting in those plans. And that in the last few years we've moved away from simply making the environment an hatched overlay over other land uses. In the most recent plans that have been produced, environment sits there as its own land use in its own right, which I think is a significant move forward. The other really important intervention we've had in the city is we've been able to introduce our conservation layer as a part of the scheme as such. So that has significant implications for allowing us then to do impact assessments, which are then based on the fact that people's properties are affected by that conservation layer. Okay, that was challenged in the High Court, and unfortunately the High Court found in the favour of the city to say that basically the city has every right to include environmental planning and broader town planning. So there was a question mark on whether we have that mandate in fact. So I mentioned that we do biodiversity impact assessment. We have our own unit within the city, and that's mainly around the planning applications, although certainly they have input on broader EIA applications. But the reason for having what would appear to be a duplication is that within the city, with small properties, multiple properties, many planned developments which would not trigger national impact assessment regulations would come under the radar, and we would be simply losing bit by bit those conservation assets. So we act to intervene at the level of our planning schemes, and we can do what is pretty much a parallel process to the EIAs. Common outcomes are environmental servitudes, so portions of properties are protected by environmental servitudes and then managed in terms of management plans. And I think I'll skip the other 2 points. So in terms of, there's certain situations we have no opportunity to defend properties, or the whole property is environmentally sensitive. There are no win-wins on a property, and then you're obviously in a situation where essentially what you're doing is expropriating potential land use rights, and we move into a land acquisition process. Alternatively, we may be looking to specifically add to conservation areas in the city, so we do land acquisition. So we've been quite fortunate in convincing our Treasury Department to make budget available since 2002, and we've been able to buy 520 hectares of conservation land in the city since then, of which 330 hectares is in fact KwaZulu-Natal sandstone itself. If you reflect back on what's currently under conservation in terms of the provincial effort, you will see that our numbers are starting to look as if they're making some reasonable contribution. We also have a scaled-down version of a biodiversity stewardship program, obviously trying to be proactive. In particular, this program is focused around our communal land in the city. So 38% of the city is under communal Ngonyama Trust Board administration jointly with the city. And much of the environmental assets sit in those parts of the city, up in the upper catchment. So we clearly have to be intervening there in a bigger way, as yet making limited inroads. But the newly formed stewardship program in the city, it has that specific focus, and I'm fairly confident we will start to make a difference in those areas too. Proclamation, perhaps I won't dwell on, but we are again being assisted by Ezemvelo in this regard. We have 10 nature reserves going through proclamation processes. One is almost ready for signing, was at the NEC's office. That will be the Risfontein Nature Reserve. And 6 of the nature reserves that are in the proclamation process, in fact, have sandstone sulfite in them, and that in total is 354 hectares. In addition, we're planning to proclaim the 330 hectares of sandstone sulfite that was bought as part of the land acquisition program. So just on rates and valuations, just to say that we have an anomaly in the city whereby people who own vacant land are penalised for owning that land in terms of a high rates randage. And we've been able to intervene with our Treasury and Real Estate Department to essentially to get them to relook at how they value properties. So it's one thing trying to stimulate development in central parts of the city where you want to densify and where services exist, but to do that throughout the city as a blanket approach is obviously fairly destructive. And so in the most recent valuation of our environment is included as a restriction on property value, and that then obviously has a knock-on effect in terms of the rates that people have to pay on their properties. And then I think this is the second to last slide. So just to say that we are undertaking management as well. That happens through a whole range of agencies in the city. Some are city agencies and others are external. In terms of our Parks Department, we were, when we were acquiring land in the early part of the program, we quickly realized that the Parks Department would not be in a position to actually take on that management burden. So we established poverty alleviation, natural resource management programs to fill that gap. And in addition, many of the properties that where people had environmental servitude restrictions placed on them, they're not in a position to undertake burning of those properties simply because many of them are accountants or doctors, etc., and that's obviously beyond their scope. So the program assists both on public land and private land in terms of trying to get a proper fire management practices in place on KwaZulu-Natal, SADS and Southfield. And then the issue of what information are you using to make to take or undertake your management actions, or which prioritize your sites, etc. Well, in reality, there's very, very little written on this particular vegetation type. In fact, I'm not aware of any specific paper on KwaZulu-Natal, SADS and Southfield, barring its description in Rutherford and a couple of other papers subsequently which touch on the vegetation type. So the university and the city have got into a research action partnership which began in 2011. And the focus is on this particular vegetation type. It's a transdisciplinary approach and it's got two goals. One is to provide relevant knowledge for implementation, the other one to increase human capacity. So we have a flyer which Jessica Coburn handed out. There are a number of speakers over the next couple of days who will be presenting from that program. So I think I'm urged to take the opportunity to go and listen to some of the results of research that they've been undertaking. And those results will be fed into our program. Chair, I've got one concluding slide, if you don't mind. I'll just finish off with that. Just to say that I hope I've been able to show that local government efforts can be significant. So at the moment, although I understand that these are not statutory protected areas, we have 752 hectares of this particular vegetation type under conservation currently, with more in servitudes in relation to that 194 we heard about. Obviously, we all need to significantly increase our effort, particularly on communal lands. We need to keep looking for the new hooks and the new instruments to try and obviously get traction and make a greater impact. And then lastly, I think perhaps a really key point is that as a department and as a broader group of conservationists, we need to make sure that we improve our mainstreaming and we learn to undertake our assessments and our strategy development and implementation with stakeholders. We tend to do these things alone, and these products are just that much more robust if we build other people into those processes. Thank you.